Hello friends, today we will learn about respiratory system. The respiratory system consists of nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and lungs. The respiratory system has many functions like first is it helps in gaseous exchange means intake of oxygen for delivery to body cells and elimination of carbon dioxide produced by cells. Second is helps to regulate blood pH. Third is contains receptors for the sense of smell, filters inspired air, produces vocal sounds and excretes small amounts of water and heat. Respiration. Let's know about whole process of respiration. The process of gas exchange in the body called respiration has three basic steps. First is a pulmonary ventilation or breathing is the inhalation and exhalation of the air between the atmosphere and alveoli of the lungs. Air flows between the atmosphere and the alveoli alveoli of the lungs because of alternating pressure differences created by contraction and relaxation of the respiratory muscles. Second is external respiration is the exchange of gases between the alveoli of the lungs and the blood in pulmonary capillaries across the respiratory membrane. In this process, pulmonary capillary blood gains oxygen and loses carbon dioxide. Third point is internal respiration, that means tissue respiration, is the exchange of gases between blood in systemic capillaries and tissue cells. In this step, the blood loses oxygen and gains carbon dioxide. Within cells, the metabolic reactions that consume oxygen and give off carbon dioxide during the production of ATP are termed cellular respiration. Come to mechanics and breathing. Let's know about mechanics and breathing. The respiratory system includes the respiratory airways, the lungs, and the respiratory muscles of the chest and abdomen. The respiratory airways are tubes that carry air between the atmosphere and the air sacs. The airways begins with the nostrils, which are lined with hairs that filters out dust and other particles. As the air passes through the nasal cavity, extensive array of cilia on its epithelial lining further cleans the air and moistens it. The nasal passage open into the pharynx, that is throat, which serves as a common pathway for both the respiratory and the digestive systems. Two tubes lead from the pharynx, the trachea, windpipe, through which air enters into the lungs and the esophagus, the tube through which food passes to the stomach. Air normally enters the pharynx through the nose, but it can enter by the mouth as well. Because the pharynx serves as a common passageway for food and air, reflex mechanisms close up the trachea during swallowing so that food enters the esophagus and not to the airways. The esophagus stays closed except during swallowing to keep air from entering the stomach during breathing. The larynx or voice box is located at the entrance of the trachea. Beyond the larynx, the trachea divides into two main branches, the right and left bronchi, which enter the right and left lungs respectively. Within end lung, the bronchus continues to breathe to branch into progressively narrower, shorter, and more numerous airways, much like the branching of a tree. The smaller the branches are known as bronchioles. At the ends of the terminal bronchioles are the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where gases are exchanged between air and blood. Human possess a pair of lungs located in the chest or thoracic cavity. The two lungs hang free within the cavity, being connected to the rest of the body only at one position where the lungs, blood vessels, and bronchus enter. The thoracic cavity is bounded on its sides by ribs, which are capable of flexing, and diaphragm, which forms the floor of the thoracic cavity, is a large dome-shaped seat of the skeletal muscles that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. Each lung is covered by a very thin, smooth membrane called the pleural membrane. The second pleural membrane marks the interior boundary of the thoracic cavity, dividing it into two halves. Each lung is thus suspended in its own cavity. Within the cavity, the weight of the lung is supported by the intrapleural fluid. Breathing or pulmonary ventilation consists of two phases, inspiration and expiration. Inspiration or inhalation and expiration or exhalation are accomplished by alternatively increasing and decreasing the volumes of the thorax and lungs. Now come to inspiration. The inspiration muscles, diaphragm and external intercostal muscles contract to accomplish an inspiration during quiet breathing. Before the beginning of inspiration, all respiratory muscles are relaxed. At the onset of inspiration, the inspiratory muscles are stimulated to contract, enlarging and thoracic cavity. The major inspiratory muscle is the diaphragm. The relaxed diaphragm has a dome shape. When the diaphragm contracts, it descends downward, enlarging the volume of the thoracic cavity by increasing its vertical dimension. 75% of the enlargement of the thoracic cavity during quiet inspiration is accomplished by contraction of the diaphragm. Two sets of intercostal muscle lie between the ribs. The external intercostal muscles lie on top of the internal intercostal muscles. Contraction of the external intercostal muscle enlarges the thoracic cavity in both the lateral and the anteropostellar dimensions. When the external intercostals contract, they elevate the ribs and the subsequently the sternum upward and outward. Before inspiration, at the end of the preceding expiration, intra-alveoli pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure. So, no air is or flowing into or out of the lungs. As the thoracic cavity enlarges during inspiration on contraction of the diaphragm and the external intercostals, the lungs are also forced to expand to fill the larger thoracic cavity. As the lungs enlarge, the alveolar pressure drops. Because the intra-alveolar pressure is now less than atmospheric pressure, air flows into the lungs down the pressure gradient from higher to lower pressure. Air continues to enter the lungs until no further gradient exists, that is, until intra-alveolar pressure equals atmospheric pressure. Thus, lung expansion is not caused by movement of air into lungs. Instead, air flows into the lungs because of the fall in intraalveolar pressure brought about the lung expansion. During inspiration, the intrapleural pressure falls to 754 mm Hg because the more Highly stressed lungs tend to pull away a bit more from the thoracic wall. Now come to expiration. Quiet expiration is a passive process. At the end of inspiration, the inspiration muscles relax. The diaphragm assumes its original dome-shaped position when it relaxes, with no forces expanding the chest wall and stretched lungs recoil to their pre-inspiratory size because of their elastic properties. As the lungs recoil and become smaller in volume, the intra-alveolar pressure rises because the greater number of air molecules contained within the larger lung volume at the end of inspiration are now compressed into a smaller volume. In a resting expiration, the intra-alveolar pressure increases above atmospheric pressure to 762 mmHg. Air now leaves the lungs down its pressure gradient from higher intra-alveolar pressure to lower atmospheric pressure. Outward flow of air ceases when intra-alveolar pressure becomes equal to atmospheric pressure and a pressure gradient no longer exists. Now come to control of breathing. A respiratory center is located in medullary rhythmicity area in the medulla oblongata and pneumotaxic as well as apneustic area in the bones of the brain stem. Medullary rhythmicity area in the medulla oblongata controls basic rhythm of respiration. The medullary rhythmicity area is divided into an inspiratory dorsal respiratory group of neurons and an expiratory ventral respiratory group of neurons. Dorsal respiratory group. It contains only inspiratory neurons and controls normal breathing process. Ventral respiratory group. It contains both expiratory and inspiratory neurons and controls forced breathing. During quiet breathing, inhalation lasts for about 2 seconds and exhalation lasts for about 3 seconds. Nerve impulses generated in the inspiratory area establish the basic rhythm of breathing. While the inspiratory area is active, it generates nerve impulses for about 2 seconds. Impulses propagate the inspiratory area is active. The impulses propagate to the external intercostal muscles via intercostal nerves and to the diaphragm via the phrenic nerves. When the nerve impulses reach the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles, the muscles contract and inhalation occurs. Even when all incoming nerve connects to the inspiratory area are cut or blocked, neurons Neurons in this area still rhythmically discharge impulses that cause inhalation. At the end of 2 seconds, the inspiratory area becomes inactive and nerve impulses ceases. With no impulses arriving, the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles relax for about 3 seconds, allowing passive elastic recoil of the lungs and thoracic wall. Then the cycle repeats. The neurons of the expiratory area remain inactive during the quiet breathing. However, during forceful breathing, nerve impulses from the inspiratory area activate the expiratory area. Impulses from the expiratory area cause contraction of the internal intercostal and abdominal muscles, which decreases the size of the thoracic cavity and causes forceful exhalation. The pneumotaxic area and apneustic area coordinate the transition between inhalation and exhalation. Pneumo, uh, pneumotaxic center is termed as switch off center. It increases or decreases the rate of breathing. This center may modulate the respiratory response to stimuli such as hypercapnia, hypoxia, and lung inflammation and regulates the duration of inspiration. Come to metabolic control. The respiratory center knows how to control the rate and depth of breathing by the amount of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and acidosis in the arterial blood. Chemoreceptors in the carotid bodies located in the carotid arteries and in the aortic bodies located in the aorta send signals and feedback to the respiratory center to increase or decrease the ventilatory output depending on the condition of these metabolic variables. For example, when we exercise, carbon dioxide levels increase significantly, which alert the chemoreceptors, which subsequently notify the brain's respiratory center to increase the rate and depth of breathing. This arterial pressure regulation feedback system that carbon dioxide, oxygen, and blood acid levels provide is referred to as the metabolic control of breathing. Excess of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions mainly stimulate the respiratory center of the brain and increase the inspiratory and expiratory signals to the respiratory muscles. However, oxygen does not have a significant direct effect on the respiratory center. Now come to respiratory volume. What do you mean by respiratory volume? When we breathe, the normal amount of air moved in and out with each breath is called the tidal volume. The tidal volume is about 500 ml, but we can increase the amount inhaled and exhaled by deep breathing. The maximum volume of air that can be moved in and out during the single breath is called the vital capacity. In a typical adult, about 70% of the tidal volume, 350, that is 350 ml, actually reaches the respiratory zone of the respiratory system. The respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and alveoli, and participates in external respiration. The other 30% means 150 ml remains in the conducting airways of the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, etc. Collectively, the air in the conducting airways that does not undergo respiratory exchange are known as the anatomic dead space. We can inhale more than 500 ml. The additional inhaled air called the inspiratory reserve volume is about 3100 ml in an average adult male and 1900 ml in an average adult female. If we inhale normally and then exhale as forcibly as possible, we can push out considerably more air in addition to the 500 ml of tidal volume. The extra air that we can exhale is called the expiratory reserve volume. Vital capacity is the sum of tidal, inspiratory reserve, and expiratory reserve volumes. Even after very deep breathing, some air remains in the lungs. This is called the residual volume. Now come to exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The purpose of breathing is to provide a continual supply of oxygen and to constantly remove carbon dioxide. Blood acts as a transport system for oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the tissues, with the tissue cells extracting oxygen from the blood and eliminating carbon dioxide into it. The exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between alveolar air and pulmonary blood occurs via passive diffusion, which is governed by the behavior of gases as described by two gas laws. that is Dalton's law and Henry's law. According to Dalton's law, each gas in a mixture of gases exerts its own pressure as if all the other gases were not present. When a liquid and a gas, such as blood, when a when a liquid and when a liquid and a gas, such as blood and alveolar air, are at equilibrium, the amount of gas dissolved in the fluid reaches a maximum value. According to Henry law, this value depends on the solubility of the gas in the fluid, the temperature of the fluid, and the partial pressure of the gas. Because solubility is a constant and the temperature of the blood does not vary significantly, the concentration of a gas dissolved in a fluid depends directly on its partial pressure in the gas mixture. The partial pressure of a gas is the pressure exerted by that gas is a mixture of gases. It is symbolized by Px, where the subscription is the chemical formula of the gas. Now come to pulmonary gas exchange. As blood passes through the lungs, it picks up oxygen and gives off carbon dioxide simply by diffusion down partial pressure gradients between blood and alveoli. Blood entering the pulmonary capillaries is systemic venous blood pumped to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. This blood, having just returned from the body tissue, is relatively low in oxygen with a PO2 of 40 mmHg and is relatively high in carbon dioxide with a PCO2 of 46 mmHg. As this blood flows through the pulmonary capillaries, it is exposed to alveolar air. Because the alveolar PO2 at 100 mmHg is higher than the PO2 of 40 mmHg in the blood entering the lungs, oxygen diffuses down its partial pressure gradient from the alveoli into the blood until no further gradient exists. As blood leaves the pulmonary capillaries, it has a PO2 equal to alveolar PO2 at 100 mmHg. The partial pressure gradient for carbon dioxide is in the opposite direction. Blood entering the pulmonary capillaries has a PCO2 of 46 mmHg, whereas alveolar PCO2 is only 40 mmHg. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli until blood PCO2 equilibrates with alveolar PCO2. Thus, blood leaving the pulmonary capillaries has a PCO2 of 40 mmHg. After leaving the lungs, the blood, which now has a PO2 of 100 mmHg and a PCO2 of 40 mmHg, is returned to the heart and then pumped out to the body tissues as systemic arterial blood. Now come to systemic gas exchange. Just like the case in pulmonary capillaries, oxygen and carbon dioxide move between the systemic capillary blood and the tissue cells by simply passive diffusion down partial pressure gradients. The arterial blood that reaches the systemic capillaries is essentially the same blood that left the lungs by means of the pulmonary veins. The arterial PO2 is 100 mmHg and the arterial PCO2 is 40 mmHg, the same as alveolar PO2 and PCO2. Cells constantly consume oxygen and produce carbon dioxide through aerobic respiration. Cellular PO2 averages about 40 mmHg and PCO2 about 46 mmHg. Although these values are highly variable depending on the level of cellular metabolic activity. Oxygen moves by diffusion down its partial pressure gradients from the entering systemic capillary blood into the adjacent cells until equilibrium is reached. Therefore, the PO2 of venous blood leaving the systemic capillaries is equal to the tissue PO2 at an average of 40 mmHg. The reverse situation exists for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide rapidly diffuses Carbon dioxide rapidly diffuses out of the cell into the entering capillary blood down the partial pressure gradient created by the ongoing production of carbon dioxide. Transfer of carbon dioxide continues until the blood PCO2 equilibrates with tissue PCO2. Accordingly, blood leaving the systemic capillaries has an average PCO2 of 46 mmHg. This this systemic venous blood, which is relatively low in oxygen and relatively high in carbon dioxide, returns to the heart and is subsequently pumped to the lungs as the cycle repeats itself. The more actively a tissue is metabolizing, the lower the cellular PO2 falls and the higher the cellular PCO2 rises. As a consequence of the larger blood to cell partial pressure gradients, more oxygen diffuses from the blood into the cells and more carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction. Before blood PO2 and PCO2 achieve equilibrium with the surrounding cells. Thus, the amount of oxygen transferred to the cells and the amount of carbon dioxide carried away from the cells both depend on the rate of cellular metabolism. Now come to transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen transport. Oxygen does not dissolve easily in water, so only about 1.5% of inhaled oxygen is dissolved in blood plasma, which is mostly water. About 98.5% of blood oxygen is bound to hemoglobin in red blood cells. Each 100 ml of oxygenated blood contains the equivalent of 20 ml of gaseous oxygen. The heme portion of hemoglobin contains 4 atoms of iron, each capable of binding to a molecule of oxygen. Oxygen and hemoglobin bind in an easily reversible reaction to form oxyhemoglobin. The 98.5% of the oxygen that is bound to hemoglobin is trapped inside RBCs. So, only the dissolved oxygen can diffuse out of tissue capillaries into tissue cells. The most important factor that determines how much oxygen binds to hemoglobin is the PO2. The higher the PO2, the more the higher the higher the PO2, the more oxygen combines with the hemoglobin. When reduced hemoglobin is completely converted to oxyhemoglobin, the hemoglobin is said to be fully saturated. When hemoglobin consists of a mixture of Hb and HbO2. It is partially saturated. The percent saturation of hemoglobin expresses the average saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. For instance, if each hemoglobin molecule bound to oxygen molecule, then the hemoglobin is 50% saturated because each Hb can bind a maximum of 4 oxygen. The relation between the percent saturation of hemoglobin is illustrated in the oxygen hemoglobin dissociated curve. CO carbon monoxide binds to the heme group of hemoglobin just as oxygen does, except that the binding of carbon monoxide to hemoglobin is over 200 times as strong as the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin, and elevated blood levels of carbon monoxide cause carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, Factors affecting hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen. Although PO2 is the most important factor that determines the percent oxygen saturation of hemoglobin, several other factors influence the tightness of or affinity with which hemoglobin binds oxygen. In effect, these factors shift the entire curve either to the left or to the right. The following three factors affect the hemoglobin's affinity. That is, first is pH, carbon dioxide, and BPH. Okay, BPG. First, pH. As pH decreases, as pH decreases means acidity increases, the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen decreases and oxygen dissociates more readily from hemoglobin. When pH decreases, the entire oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve shifts to the right at any given PO2. Hb is less saturated with oxygen, a change termed the Bohr's effect. Now come to second point is partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can also bind to hemoglobin and the effect is similar to that of H plus. As PCO2 rises, the hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily. PCO2 and pH are related factors because low blood pH, that is acidity, results from high PCO2. As carbon dioxide enters the blood, much of it is temporarily converted to carbonic acid, a reaction catalyzed by an enzyme in red blood cells called carbonic anhydrase. The carbonic acid thus found in red blood cells dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. As the hydrogen concentration increases, the pH decreases. Thus, an increased PCO2 produces a more acidic environment, which helps in the release of oxygen from hemoglobin. BPH. Now come to BPG, a substance found in red blood cells called 2,3 biphosphoglycerate, previously called diphosphoglycerate, decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen and thus helps unload oxygen from hemoglobin. When BPG combines with hemoglobin by binding to the terminal amino groups of the two beta globin chains, the hemoglobin binds oxygen less tightly at the heme group sites. The greater the level of BPG, the more oxygen is loaded from hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide transport. When arterial blood flows through the tissue capillaries, carbon dioxide diffuses down its partial pressure gradient from the tissue cells into blood. Carbon dioxide is transported in the blood in three ways. Now come to dissolved ways. That is, first is dissolved carbon dioxide, carboamino compound, third is bicarbonate ions. First is dissolved carbon dioxide. Let's know about dissolved carbon dioxide. About 7% of carbon dioxide is dissolved in blood plasma. The amount of carbon dioxide physically dissolved in the blood depends on the PCO2. Because carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen in plasma water, a greater portion of the total carbon dioxide than of oxygen in the blood is physically dissolved. Carboamino compound is a somewhat higher percentage, about 23%, combines combines with the amino groups of the amino acids and proteins in the blood to form carbamino compounds. Because the most prevalent protein in blood is hemoglobin, most of the carbon dioxide transported in this manner is bound to hemoglobin. The main carbon dioxide binding sites are the terminal amino acids in the 2 alpha and 2 beta globin chains. Hemoglobin that has bound carbon dioxide is termed carbaminohemoglobin. Now come to bicarbonate ions. The greatest percentage of carbon dioxide, about 70%, is transported in blood plasma as bicarbonate ions. As carbon dioxide diffuses into systemic capillaries and enters red blood cells, it reacts with water in the presence of enzyme carbonic anhydrase to form carbonic acids, which dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus. Thus, as blood peaks of carbon dioxide, bicarbonate accumulates inside RBCs. Some bicarbonate ions move out into the blood plasma down its concentration gradient. In exchange, chloride ions move from plasma into the RBC. The exchange of negative ions, which maintains the electrical balance between blood plasma and RBC systole, is known as a chloride shift. The amount of carbon dioxide that can be transported in the blood is influenced by the percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. The lower the amount of oxyhemoglobin, the higher the carbon dioxide carrying capacity of the blood, a relationship known as Halden effect. Two characteristics of deoxyhemoglobin give rise to the Halden effect. First is deoxyhemoglobin binds to and thus transports more carbon dioxide than does HbO2. Second is deoxyhemoglobin also buffers more H plus than does HbO2, thereby removing H plus from solution and promoting the conversion of carbon dioxide to carbonic acid via the reaction catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase. Let's know some respiratory states. Apnea. Apnea is transient cessation of breathing. Asphyxia, that is that is a lack of oxygen in tissues. Cyanosis, blueness of skin resulting from insufficient oxygenated blood in the arteries. Eupnea, normal breathing, and hypercapnia, that is excess carbon dioxide in the arterial blood. Hyperpnea means increased pulmonary ventilation that matches increased metabolic demands as in exercise. Hypocapnia, that means below normal carbon dioxide in the arterial blood. Hypocapnia, below normal carbon dioxide at the cellular level, like this. Okay, thank you. Completed.